2 weeks of delivery woes put the Boston Globe on the front pages of its own paper, a story driven by the business side of the paper. But this week, the Globe's editorial board brought the story full cycle, calling for an independent investigation into the delivery service's labor practices. For the second Sunday in a row, Boston Globe reporters were called in to help deliver the Sunday paper. By Monday, the Globe's old delivery service was back in action alongside the new one. And while problems persist, the worst may be over. But a Sunday story by Michael Levinson dug beyond delivery problems, reporting that many drivers get no vacation, overtime pay, or workers' compensation, and often work 365 days a year. That's because drivers are classified as independent contractors, not employees of the delivery companies. Sounds like a story for Spotlight. In fact, 2 years ago, the Boston Globe Spotlight team uncovered similar problems inside the local taxi industry.
The largely immigrant workforce of drivers experiences staggering exploitation at the hands of cab owners.
Like newspaper delivery drivers, cabbies are treated as independent contractors with no benefits, no vacation time, and worse.
If it's not a good day, the owner will still make his money and you don't.
But now the Boston Globe's own editorial board is calling on authorities to investigate labor practices in the newspaper delivery industry. Its new delivery service, ACI, is a good place to start. They haven't been returning reporter phone calls, but I bet Spotlight could get to the bottom of this. I really think, why not have Spotlight? They did that. It was similar. There's some obvious big differences with the cab driver story, but this is ripe material for an investigative report. I mean, it's one thing to have the Attorney General or the, National Labor Relations Board do it, but this is a news story. And, Brian McGrory has said they're going to be as tough on this story as they would be on any other. I mean, this is an opportunity.
I agree with you, Emily. I think it would be a great story. By the way, I think the Globe has done some pretty good reporting on this so far, but I'd like to see more. I would have liked to see the editorial maybe call for an investigation into whether the Globe could be doing more in their relations with these companies that are doing the delivery. And this problem, it's not over. I mean, they reported this week, it could be 6 weeks before things return to normal. One of the complaints I'm hearing now from people is that they're getting, even when they're getting the paper, it's such an early edition that the late scores aren't in there. A lot of the things that they're used to getting in a late edition of the Globe are missing because they're getting a very early edition. So you get the feeling that this is moving in the right direction, but it's very slow and they're not there yet.
Well, so some of us got an email from an angry viewer from our last week conversation saying we weren't tough enough. Okay, here we go. He hasn't gotten his newspaper in many months. He says, what are we talking about? Like it's over. It's not over. You've just said that. And I think Spotlight may be a good place to start, but maybe not this Spotlight, because this Spotlight works independently. They're supposed to be able to dig deep and come back with whatever it is and, without fear or favor. I'm sorry, I just don't think they can do it at home. I just don't think they can do it, meaning at home in their own space. And I'm going to give them a pass on that. But somebody needs to talk about what's going on here, because a lot has been revealed. Very well done reporting, not only here, as we've said here last week and this week, but also for some other folks, even if the Herald hasn't weighed in. So at this point, we know what the issues are. The question is, what will now be done? And how, or do you just come out and say, you know what, this is the job. We're not going to pay you. You're going to be an immigrant. You're going to work 3 jobs, and maybe you'll get your paper or not.
Well, in fairness to the newspaper, the biggest problem with being in the newspaper business is printing a newspaper, because that's if the Boston Globe could get rid of printing and delivering a newspaper every day and all they did was PR online, that would be a very happy company, except it would be one that only has about, 30% of the revenue it gets now. But this really goes back into the history of the way newspapers were delivered. Newspaper boys, of which I was one, maybe you did that when you were teenagers, they've now gotten rid of all all that. Newspaper boys were never employees of the newspaper, so in a sense they were independent contractors. You got paid so much per paper and that sort of thing. Then we made the transition when that was determined to be illegal in child labor, and they started, well, who would do that? Who would get up at 2 in the morning and do this? It did go to people who would do a second job and so forth, and it tended to be immigrants and working. The problem is they never did treat these people anything better than they did teenage kids. And that's really, they've got to go back and decide, are we going to try to attract adults into a job and then treat them like an adult needs to be treated, meaning minimum wage and so forth. And that ultimately, that's the question.
Yeah, by the way, great job by Mike Levinson on that story. Marcela Garcia, the columnist, had earlier written about that same subject. And good on the Boston Globe editorial board for writing, and I don't think anyone really expected them to come out and write that editorial. But this raises a broader issue that I think all news organizations need to grapple with, which is if we're going to wag our fingers at, say, politicians whose campaign committees screw over their employees, don't pay health benefits, don't hire enough women, whatever it might be, thinking of the types of stories I've seen in the Globe over the years, just to mention one outlet, then I think you can plausibly claim that the business side of an enterprise like the Globe can't be held sacrosanct from the realities of what goes on with its own workers or with its subcontractors. If responsibility is global, no pun intended, then what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And what about the Herald? Still, not a word about this major story affecting the community. I realize the Globe prints the Herald, but it's two separate companies. Where's the antitrust investigation here?
I don't know. We asked that last question last week, too. It's really amazing.